A scream echoes across midnight Venice, vanishing into the canals. Welcome to Shadow Files. I'm your host, Kale. Tell me where you're tuning in tonight. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Now, the mystery begins. The moon hung low over Venice, its pale reflection fractured by the rippling waters of the Grand Canal. Gondolas swayed idly at their moorings, black silhouettes against a city that seemed to dream in silence. But in the gilded Palazzo Contarini, where a masquerade ball glittered with music and champagne, silence was the last thing on anyone's mind. The chandeliers glowed like captured constellations. Ladies in jewel-toned gowns drifted across marble floors, their faces hidden by masks of gold and velvet. Laughter mingled with the faint strains of a string quartet, and the scent of roses filled the air. To the casual eye, it was a night of elegance, refinement, and gaiety. And yet, beneath the gaiety, tension coiled like a serpent. At precisely midnight, a sudden commotion shattered the festive spell. A scream, high, sharp, and desperate, echoed through the great hall. The music faltered. Guests froze, startled glances darting across the room. Within moments, the host of the evening, Count Rinaldo Contarini, staggered into view. His mask was askew, his fine silk cloak torn. More shocking still, his hands were crimson with blood. "Sylvia," he cried, his voice hoarse. "My wife, she's gone." The crowd surged like a restless tide, masks pushed aside, fans clutched tightly in nervous fingers. Guests rushed toward the east wing of the palazzo, where the Contarini's private apartments lay. There, in a chamber lit only by the flicker of dying candles, lay the dreadful scene. A balcony door flung wide open to the canal below, curtains billowing like shrouds in the night breeze, and on the marble floor, an ornate Venetian dagger, its blade slick with blood. But of the Countess, Silvia Contarini, there was no trace. Some swore they had heard the splash of water. Others claimed they had seen a shadowed figure slip into a waiting gondola. No one could agree. All that remained certain was this: a woman had vanished and blood had been spilled. The masked ball dissolved into chaos. Guests whispered in frightened tones. Servants wrung their hands. The carabinieri were summoned, but confusion only deepened. A noblewoman gone, a dagger left behind, and a husband's bloodied hands. Was it murder, abduction, or some ghastly masquerade of its own? Above the hubbub, the ancient city listened, its canals dark and inscrutable. Venice had seen centuries of intrigue, betrayal, and crime. Tonight, it would see another. For this was no ordinary disappearance. It was the beginning of a mystery that would test the keenest of minds, a puzzle tangled in jealousy, deceit, and hidden truths. And soon, though none could know it yet, the greatest detective in the world, Hercule Poirot, would set foot upon these shadowed waters, bringing with him the relentless order of his little grey cells. The carabinieri arrived with a suddenness that steadied the chaos into a kind of brittle order. Boots struck marble, voices fell to whispers, and a young officer posted himself at the arch, leading to the east wing. Lanterns bobbed along the canal steps below, throwing brief ellipses of light upon the water. Inside, the great chandeliers were dimmed and the guests shepherded, one by one, towards the Salone degli Specchi, the Hall of Mirrors, where a long table had been cleared of orchids and champagne to make space for notebooks and an inkstand. Venice did not close her eyes, not even for scandal, but she held her breath. Inspector Aldo Ricci, narrow of face and neat in the way of a man who dislikes being surprised by buttons, took command with a formal bow to Count Rinaldo Contarini, and a glance, keen and tired, at the eastward door. He listened without interrupting as the Count told his tale, how the midnight toast had barely rung the crystal when a scream had cut through the music, how he had run, tearing the clasp of his cloak, how he had found the balcony doors flung wide, the curtains breathing in the night air, and the dagger glistening like a sentence upon the floor. Ricci's gaze lingered on the blood that dried dark upon the Count's hands. "You did not wash?" he asked. "It is my wife's blood," said the Count roughly, as if the words were a penance. "I touched the blade. Foolish, yes. I meant to. God knows what I meant." "We shall bring a basin," said Ricci. "But not yet." He sent 2 constables to the canal steps and another to the narrow service passage that led to the private moorings used by the household. Then he began the gentle coercion that collects a circle and calls it closed. The palace doors were locked. Gondolas were halted and checked beneath the arches. The ballroom music ceased altogether, and the string quartet, half offended, half relieved, laid their instruments in velvet cases and eyed the guests with the avidity of men who sensed the price of a story rising in the telling. Ricci's list formed itself, a sequence of names with the glue of relatability and malice attaching to each. There was the husband, of course, Rinaldo Contarini, last of his line in a palace whose age had grown heavier than its fortune. There was Bianca Volterra, the celebrated soprano from La Fenice, her silver mask pushed up on her crown of dark hair, her throat, famous as an instrument and notorious as a battlefield, bare but for a chain of seed pearls. Vittorio Bianchi, the Count's associate in certain glassworks on Murano, fleshy and affable in the way of men who would rather shake hands than sign accounts. Dr. Emilio Farnese, the family physician, smooth-palmed and unhurried, his black bag placed precisely at his toe. Marchesa Lucia Bellante, a widow of rigorous taste and alarming memory, who planted herself upon the brocade like a scepter upon silk. Caterina Rossi, the Countess's maid, a slim, pale girl with a quick swallow and shoes that squeaked faintly when she crossed the polished floor. Niccolo Sarto, a gondolier attached to the palazzo, shoulders like oars and eyes built for squinting into fog. Julian Moravec, a French dealer whose conversation could make a masterpiece sound like a bargain. There were others: the butler, Signor Alvis, the housekeeper, a violinist who insisted he had seen someone in white, though his tone suggested he had seen very little in his life that was not sheet music. They were enough. The circle was drawn. "None of you will leave," Ricci said without severity. "I ask only for patience and exactness." He began with timing, because time is the most polite of traps. Midnight, the toast, the scream moments after. In the east wing, a balcony door opened to the canal, a dagger on the floor. In the mirror-swathed hall, the faces waiting for the same law that weighed upon their reflections. He noted how the Count pressed his fingers together as though to fuse them, how Bianca Volterra's gaze drifted from face to face, never settling on the dagger in his mind. How Vittorio Bianchi dabbed at his upper lip despite the cool, how the maid's damp soles left the faintest print that dried as quickly as shame. "Count Contarini," Ricci said, "from 11 o'clock to the midnight toast. Your movements?" "In the ballroom mainly," the Count replied. "Our guests expected visibility. I circulated. I spoke with Signor Moravec on the loggia regarding a philanthropic sale. I danced with my wife at 20 minutes to midnight." The words stumbled, and he steadied them. She returned to her chamber to fetch a shawl. She is often chilled in drafts. "You quarreled?" Ricci asked, as if he were offering the Count the relief of a confession in a small matter so he might avoid the necessity of a larger. "We disagreed over nothing that matters now." He lifted his eyes. "I loved my wife." Ricci turned to Bianca Volterra, who had covered her pearls with her hand, as if they might be listening. "Signora, were you acquainted with the Countess?" "We were acquainted by proximity," Bianca said, the cool vowels of the stage warming at the edges. "Venice is a theater. We share a roof." She was gracious. "We spoke this evening by the fountain." She returned a brooch I had dropped earlier in the week. On the loggia or in a corridor, I do not recall. Convenient, said the Marchesa gently, and Ricci made a note that contained no words, only a line beneath a name. I sang the Brindisi at midnight, Bianca continued. Ask Maestro De Luca. I was on the dais when the scream came. I could not be in two places at once, Inspector, however the reviewers think of me. Vittorio Bianchi smoothed his waistcoat as if calmed by the act. I will save you time, Signor Inspector. If you are collecting motives, write. Debts beside my name. I owe money to the world and her cousin. But murder is a ledger one cannot balance, and I am too fond of my dinner. You spoke with the Count about funding, Ricci asked. Of course. A man with obligations must speak often. The Countess wished the glassworks dimmed. Something about antiquities being sold to rescue realities. It was a difference of philosophy, not a war. Yet a difference has battles, murmured the Marchesa, but faintly, as though to herself. Dr. Farnese blinked with a serenity that could have been conscientiousness or camouflage. The Countess has had a touch of nervous exhaustion, he said. I prescribed bromide, mild as milk. I call every week. Tonight I admired the musicians, took a glass of Prosecco, and talked about measles with the housekeeper. Romance. Your bag, Ricci gestured. My tools, said the doctor placidly, opening it to reveal stethoscope, thermometer, a neat white box. You may sniff them if you must. I'm not a poisoner. I do not despise people enough for that poison. Bianca flinched. But the blood. Blood does not guarantee the absence of poison, Ricci said, and now the butler raised a hand with a delicacy that suggested he had practiced announcements upon a mirror. Signor Inspector, if I may, there is the matter of the private steps. Signor Alvise's voice had the silk of service, but its thread was pulled tight. Niccolo found the mooring rope, how do I say, polished, as if a gondola had come and gone very quickly. One of the old gondolas is missing from the lower boathouse. It is the one with the red velvet cushions from the late Count's time. All eyes found Niccolo Sarto, who shifted and frowned. It was there at 11:40, he said. I had taken Signor Bianchi's friends to the Campo. I returned to the service steps for a cigarette. Alvise asked me to fetch more lantern oil. I went. When I came back, 5-10 minutes, the water said a boat had left. One can tell if one listens. He jerked his chin toward the canal with a professional's contempt for amateurs. I did not see which, but the velvet boat was wanted for polishing last week. Now it is gone. I do not steal from my own. Who else knows the private steps? Ricci asked. Staff, said the housekeeper, and the family, and anyone who kisses a member of either. Lucia, murmured the Count, weary. The Marchesa ignored him, and a handful of the Count's particular guests know every step from the kitchen to the confessional, she said with mild relish. Venice has no secrets, Inspector. She has habits. Julian Moravec spoke for the first time, letting the smoke of his cigarette write his alibi in the air. At 11:50 I was upon the terrace, he said. The moon was a painting. I thought of a Titian I might assist in placing for a price that is philanthropy by another name. The Countess disapproved of my charm. She prefers the past to pay for itself. We had exchanged cool courtesies earlier. At midnight I was speaking to Marchesa Bellante about a small altarpiece with a better future. She will remember. The scream interrupted a sentence upon provenance. I resent the Countess for that, if for nothing else. A trifle vulgar, said the Marchesa, but not quite denying. Caterina Rossi, who had been petrified into silence, suddenly found it too heavy to hold. Madonna mia, she burst, I did not harm her. I brought the shawl she wanted, the blue one with the fringe, and left it on the chair. She said she would come. When the scream came, I was in the linen room because the window latch is broken and the wind... She swallowed. My shoes, they squeak because of the damp. The floor near the balcony was only a little. It is the night air. Your skirts are dry, Richie observed. You stepped in wet, not out into it. Katerina's eyes, large and frightened, slid briefly to the Count, then away. I am clumsy, she whispered. Ricci sent a glance to the young officer at the east wing door and received a discreet nod. The balcony had yielded little. A smear of something dark on the stone balustrade, perhaps grease from an oarlock, perhaps 100 other things that mimic gilt, and a single thread snagged upon a splinter in the carved wood, coral-colored, though the maid swore the Countess had asked for blue. The dagger itself, ornate and theatrical, had been pulled from a case upon the wall. A faint rectangle of dust marked its former bed, and a duller patch upon the velvet told of recent handling before tonight. The curtains bore a smudge of powder near the height of a man's shoulder. A feminine cosmetic, likely, but the world had been full of powdered men for the last 7 hours. Inspector Ricci's pencil skated, halted, underlined. The canal patrol reported that a gondola matching the description had passed under the Ponte del Maltempo midnight, rowed by a masked figure in a dark cloak with a cut like a swallow's tail. The watchman on the bridge had thought it a lark. No passenger was visible. Of the Countess, there was still no trace. Count Contarini, Ricci said at last, a matter of money. Forgive bluntness. Is your house, its financial health, robust? Rinaldo's jaw flexed. Venice teaches one to live on water, he said. We manage. We sell a painting, we light another chandelier. Sylvia opposed selling the Titian. She was principled. He gave a small, hopeless laugh. And right too often. Principles are excellent until they buy bread, Vittorio murmured, and then blushed at his own candor. Bianca Volterra shifted again, and Ricci, following the movement, saw the faintest reddening along the side of her right hand, as if she had brushed against hot wax. He had not ordered the candles snuffed in the east wing, a few guttered upon, their brass stands, one with a glaze of blue drips unfashionable in the palace and likely imported. He looked past Bianca to Moravec, whose glove bore a tiny shining bead that could have been wax, catching the light, or merely a trick of the mirror. You will all provide your masks for examination, he said, especially those with feathers. The footman found a broken plume near the private steps. He permitted himself no speculation about what a feather could remember, for feathers are born traitors to disguises and fond of repeating the slights of the night. A clock somewhere far in the older stone struck one. In the lull after the note, the city breathed again. A barcarolle drifted from a quarter-mile away. A dog barked and was hushed. The Count rested his blood-stained hands upon the table and did not seem to feel the inkstand stain them further. There is more, he said in a low voice, so that those closest leaned in as if complicit. There was a letter, this morning, addressed to Sylvia in a hand I did not recognize. She placed it in her escritoire and turned the key. Tonight, the lock is scratched. The letter is gone. Who knew of it? Ricci asked. Myself. Caterina, perhaps the Marchesa. He smiled without humor. And the city, if it chose. The Marchesa inclined her head, neither confirming nor denying. I counseled the Countess to burn sentiment before it smoked, she said. She was young. She preferred to watch it smolder. Ricci closed his notebook. He had enough for the night and too little for the truth. He could summon divers at dawn and telegraph the harbor. He could impound the boats, examine the dagger, inventory the jewels. He could follow the neat lines of method and know, as one knows the tide will return, that somewhere the method would mislead him by obeying too well. He did not sigh. He rarely did. He looked instead at the ornate room filled with faces that had learned to hide behind masks, even when the masks were off, and thought of a man whose vanity for order was matched by a genius for the disordered human heart. Count, he said quietly, there is a person in Venice this week whom one consults when the water will not tell its secrets. A Belgian gentleman, fastidious, small in the way that makes rooms taller. He dines as if the truth might be placed upon a plate correctly, or not at all. He dislikes drafts, and the untidy Rinaldo Contarini looked up as a man looks up at a rope thrown cleanly over a drowning panic. You speak of Hercule Poirot. Ricci allowed himself the ghost of a smile. I do. It is said he keeps his little grey cells in better order than a sacristan keeps his reliquaries. If you wish it, I will send a message. He lodges at the Daniele. He cannot cross the canal in two places at once either, but he has a way of making the canal come to him. The Count nodded once, as if consenting to a surgery that might save a life, or at least pronounce it lost with elegance. Send, he said. We are past pride. The young officer departed at a run, his footsteps fading down the stone corridor, out into the soft night, across the small bridge where lanterns made halos upon the water. In the Hall of Mirrors, the suspects held what calm they could, each nursing an injury invisible to the others, a bruise of fear, a scratch of vanity, a soreness where desire had gone wrong. The chandeliers gave the faintest creak as the palace settled into its vigil. Somewhere in the east wing, a candelabrum flared and guttered. The blue wax on one stem hardened into a tear. Ricci watched it set and thought, not for the first time, that men plan crimes with their appetites and betray them with their habits. Outside, a gondola cut the canal without hurry, guided by a hand that knew every eddy. The wake lapped the private steps below the balcony as if the city itself were testing the depth of what had happened. Venice did not speak, but she remembered. By the time the messenger reached the Daniele and the concierge bowed his comprehension of the name written upon the folded card, the night had grown thin, and the stars paled in a sky that had begun to consider morning. The circle remained unbroken in the Salon degli Specchi, bound not by justice, yet but by necessity, waiting for the small, immaculate man who would ask them to place their stories in order and discover which story refused to stay where it was put. The city awoke reluctantly, as though unwilling to admit that daylight had come to illuminate the scandal whispered across her canals. The morning fog hung low, shrouding bridges and domes and muffling the sound of gondoliers calling to one another. Yet inside the Palazzo Contarini, there was no mistaking the transition from night to day. The chandeliers had been dimmed and shutters half drawn, but the pale Venetian dawn crept in all the same, brushing the marble with a melancholy glow. The Grand Salone degli Specchi remained heavy with tension. Its occupants sat in silence or whispered in clusters, masks discarded, champagne forgotten, and eyes darting toward the door each time a footstep echoed. It was in this charged stillness that Hercule Poirot made his entrance. The little Belgian stood framed in the doorway, a figure at once modest and impossible to ignore. His immaculate grey suit bore no wrinkle, his shoes gleamed in spite of the canal damp, and his mustaches, those marvels of personal architecture, curved with such perfection they might have been designed by Palladio himself. He removed his hat with deliberate grace, inclined his head toward the Count, and surveyed the gathering with a single, comprehensive glance. "Messieurs, mesdames," he said softly, "I regret to intrude upon what should have been an evening of festivity. But alas, Venice has given us not a celebration, but a puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, have been summoned to resolve it." There was a murmur, half relief, half skepticism. Inspector Ricci, who had risen to greet him, gave a slight nod, his expression betraying respect tinged with impatience. Poirot, however, was not disconcerted. He placed his hat carefully on the table, drew forth a handkerchief to brush an invisible speck from his cuff, and seated himself with the composure of a man certain that all will be set in order, eventually. Count Rinaldo Contarini rose, his face pale but his bearing proud. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "my wife has vanished. Blood was found, a dagger lies in her chamber, and my honor is questioned. I beg you, help us." Poirot inclined his head. It is for the truth we search, Count. Honor will find itself once truth has spoken, his gaze sharpened. I shall require that each person here recount for me the events of last night, in detail. Small things, they are of the utmost importance. People think it is the grand gesture, the dramatic cry. But no, it is the gesture that is too small to notice, that betrays the truth, Ricci interjected briskly. I have gathered their accounts, Monsieur Poirot. Shall I? Poirot raised a finger. No, my good inspector. Forgive me. You are the guardian of the law, I of psychology. The words, they must fall freshly, not rehearsed, so that my little grey cells may arrange them. And so it began, the slow, deliberate weaving of the circle tighter. First came Bianca Volterra, her mask gone but her glamour undimmed. Her soprano voice, even in ordinary speech, had a tremor of theatricality. She described her role in the midnight toast, how she had lifted her glass and begun the brindisi when the scream cut the air. She claimed she had seen nothing of the Countess since an hour before, when Silvia Contarini returned a misplaced brooch. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, la brooch, you are certain it was yours, madame. It had not wandered from another. Bianca drew herself up, affronted. It was mine. I do not mistake my own jewels. Poirot smiled gently, as if her indignation had confirmed some small theory. He asked no further questions, but his eyes flicked to her reddened right hand before moving on. Next came Vittorio Bianchi. The glass merchant dabbed his brow and admitted freely to his debts. But I am no fool, Monsieur Poirot. To kill a countess is not to erase a ledger. It is only to add a noose to one's collar. Indeed, Poirot murmured. But a desperate man may act irrationally, n'est-ce pas? It is not the arithmetic of the head, but the fever of the heart that drives murder. Vittorio spread his hands. If fever drove me, it drove me only toward food and wine. Ask the servants. I ate at midnight, not plotted. Poirot asked no more, though his mustaches twitched in thought. Dr. Emilio Farnese, calm as ever, spoke of the Countess's frailty, her nervous exhaustion, and his prescription. Poirot interrupted once. Doctor, you are precise. When you prescribe, do you write the instructions with clarity? Always, Farnese replied. Poirot leaned back. Then perhaps you will explain why a lady who is fragile of nerve should return from a ball to fetch a shawl rather than request it of her maid. It is but a detail, Doctor, yet details are stubborn little beasts. The physician's lips curved faintly. Perhaps she wished for solitude, Monsieur Poirot. Even a nervous lady may tire of society. Just so, said Poirot softly, though the note of irony was unmistakable. Marchesa Bellante was next, regal and cutting in her wit. She spoke of hearing the scream, of conversing with Moravec at the time. And I repeat, Monsieur Poirot, Venice hides nothing. Every guest at that ball has secrets, but none are truly secret. Poirot inclined his head. An excellent observation, madame. Yet it is not the secrets that matter, but the lies told to protect them. Secrets are passive. Lies, they are active, creative, revealing. The Marchesa's smile did not falter, though her eyes glittered with interest. Caterina Rossi, the maid, wrung her hands and spoke of fetching the blue shawl. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, you say you placed it on the chair. Yet the thread found was coral. How do you explain this? The girl faltered, her cheeks flushing. Perhaps I was mistaken. I only know she asked for the blue shawl. Poirot regarded her gently. Do not be afraid, child. It is not yet the gallows you face, but only my mustaches. They are formidable, but not fatal. His smile coaxed a nervous laugh from the girl, though her eyes remained anxious. Niccolo Sarto, the gondolier, repeated his account of the missing velvet boat. Poirot asked him, "Mon ami, you are a man of the water. Tell me, if a body falls into the canal, does the water keep it or does it return it?" Niccolo shrugged. "Depends on the current, the tide, the stones beneath. The water gives back when it pleases. Monsieur, then we must persuade it to please us sooner rather than later," Poirot murmured. Finally came Julien Moravec, who exhaled smoke and spoke with detached elegance of art and commerce. Poirot interrupted once. "Monsieur, you say you conversed with the Marchesa at midnight. Forgive me, but did you raise your right hand to gesture, as is your habit?" Moravec blinked. "Perhaps. I speak with my hands." Like all Frenchmen, Poirot's gaze lingered on the bead of wax upon his glove. "Ah, but a candle may betray more eloquently than words." "We shall see." When each had spoken, Poirot folded his hands and surveyed them all. "Messieurs, mesdames, I thank you. The truth, it lies not in what you said, but in how you said it. Already the pattern begins to form?" Ricci frowned. "You have suspects, then?" Poirot smiled, but naturally, Inspector. "Every one of them. For until the puzzle is complete, we must not discard a single piece. Even the smallest may. Hold the picture." The guests shifted uneasily. Poirot rose. "Now, I must see the scene. Lead me, if you please, to the Countess's chamber." The procession moved, quiet as a funeral, through the dim corridors to the east wing. The room stood as it had in the night. The balcony doors open, the curtains swaying, the dagger on the floor like a relic of violence. Poirot paused on the threshold, his eyes narrowing. He stepped carefully inside, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the marble. First, he examined the dagger. He touched nothing but bent low, his mustaches nearly brushing the floor. "A fine ornament, this," he murmured. "Too fine for killing unless the killer wished to make a point." Next, the curtains. He noted the smudge of powder on the fabric, his nose twitching delicately as if scenting a trail invisible to others. Powder, yes. A man would not wear it, except perhaps one who has borrowed a mask too hastily. His eyes flicked toward Moravec, though he said nothing aloud. Then the balcony. Poirot stepped out, gazing at the canal below. The water lapped softly, innocent in appearance, yet treacherous beneath. His gaze fell on the balustrade. He bent closer, his eyes catching the smear Ricci had noted. Grease, yes, but not from a gondola's oar. Non, it is too thick, too heavy. This is machinery, not boat work. He straightened, his mind already racing. Something is missing here, Inspector. Not the Countess alone. Something else, Ricci frowned. What do you mean? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Patience, mon ami. The little grey cells, they are like a symphony. They must play through before the melody is clear. But I tell you this, what appears a simple abduction or a crime of passion, non. It is neither simple nor only passion. It is a composition more subtle. A masquerade behind a masquerade. He returned to the chamber, his gaze sweeping every detail. The shawl on the chair, blue with fringe. The escritoire with its scratched lock. The candles, their wax congealed. At last, he straightened. Inspector, I shall require two things. First, that we recover every scrap of ash from these candles. Second, that we search not only the canal, but every gondola moored within half a mile. Somewhere, the velvet cushions will speak. Ricci nodded, dispatching orders at once. Poirot turned to the Count. And you, Count Contarini, steel yourself, for before the day is out, I shall know more of this letter that has vanished. Letters, they are like whispers written down, and whispers, they betray more than shouts. The Count bowed his head, defeated. Poirot looked once more at the circle of uneasy faces, then smiled faintly. Messieurs, mesdames, let us not despair. The truth, it is like the sun. For a time, the fog conceals it, but inevitably, it rises, and when it does, it will reveal everything. The words settled like a verdict, and silence fell. Outside, the fog thinned. The bells of San Marco began to toll the hour. Venice, ancient and inscrutable, listened once more, while in the palazzo, Hercule Poirot prepared to untangle a web spun of blood, deception, and human folly. The fog that had cloaked Venice in the small hours began to lift by mid-morning, revealing a city brightening under reluctant sunlight. The canals glittered dully, like a mirror that had been carelessly wiped, still smeared with secrets. Inside the Palazzo Contarini, the guests, or prisoners, depending on how one chose to see them, lingered under the watchful eyes of the carabinieri. The Salone degli Specchi had become both courtroom and antechamber, and the weight of its mirrored walls seemed to press more heavily upon each occupant. Poirot, however, moved with serenity, as though he were taking a promenade rather than entering a chamber of suspicion. His step was measured, his gaze alert but unhurried, and his immaculate cuffs remained uncreased in spite of the long night. He took his seat at the long table once more, and with a delicate clearing of the throat, he announced, "Mes amis, we shall proceed now with the interviews, one by one. In such matters, truth reveals herself most clearly when she is wooed in private. To speak before an audience, it is to perform. To speak alone, it is to betray oneself." Inspector Ritchie gave a curt nod and signaled to the guards. The first name was spoken, Bianca Volterra. The celebrated soprano entered with the poise of one accustomed to center stage. Even in daylight, with fatigue shadowing her eyes, she carried herself like a woman awaiting applause. She sank into the chair across from Poirot with a dramatic sigh, the pearls at her throat trembling faintly. "Madame Volterra," Poirot began, his tone smooth, "you are accustomed to wearing the mask. Upon the stage, I mean. And last night also, you wore one, no?" She smiled faintly. "A mask, yes. But I am always visible, Monsieur Poirot. My voice cannot be disguised, just so. And yet a voice may sing the truth, or it may sing the lie. Tell me, the brooch. You say the Countess returned it to you last night. When exactly?" "By the fountain, not long before the toast. She placed it in my hand herself." Poirot tilted his head. "And she did not remark upon finding it? Did she not ask how it came to be misplaced?" Bianca hesitated, her theatrical confidence faltering for a moment. She said nothing of that. Only that she believed it, mine Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, but you are a lady of taste, madame. Would you not recognize at once the brooch of another? Could it be the Countess mistook ownership?" Bianca's lips pressed together. "Perhaps. It was dimly lit. Perhaps it was similar. Perhaps, yes. Or perhaps she meant to test you, to see your reaction. Tell me, madame, your hand, the redness upon it. It comes from wax, does it not? Did you steady yourself upon a candlestick when you sang?" Her eyes flashed. "I touched a candle, yes." "It was an accident." Poirot nodded softly. "Accident, intention, coincidence. How alike they appear until the moment comes when one knows which is which." She rose, unsettled, and Poirot dismissed her with a courteous bow. Vittorio Bianchi was next, large and genial, his perspiration belying his attempts at composure. He sat heavily, like a man who feared his chair might not hold him. "Monsieur Bianchi," Poirot said, "the debts, they weigh upon you, yes?" "Like chains," Vittorio admitted, spreading his hands. "But chains are heavy, not sharp." "I did not wield a dagger." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "And yet you quarreled with the Countess." "She disapproved of your plans for the glassworks." "She was principled, yes." "Too principled. She said my dealings with Signor Moravec were reckless. But that does not mean I—" He stopped, dabbing his brow. "I only wish to save my business." save or exploit? Poirot murmured, though not unkindly. And when you left the ballroom to fetch a lantern with the gondolier, how long, precisely, were you absent? Vittorio shifted uncomfortably. 10 minutes, no more. Poirot regarded him keenly. 10 minutes, it is enough to row a gondola from the private steps to the Ponte del Maltempo. Vittorio blustered. You suspect me? Ask the gondolier. I was with him. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, but a man may be with another for part of the time and alone for the rest. We shall not condemn, monsieur. We merely consider when Vittorio left, Poirot sat very still, as though arranging pieces upon a mental chessboard. Dr. Emilio Farnese entered with his habitual serenity, his black bag once again placed at his side like a faithful dog. Doctor, Poirot said gently, the Countess suffered from nerves, you say? Was she in fear of something? Only of her own health, monsieur. She was delicate, easily fatigued. Delicate, yet strong enough to quarrel with her husband to oppose him? Farnese smiled thinly. Principles sometimes give strength where the body does not. Poirot leaned forward. Doctor, when you examined her prescriptions, did you notice whether she followed them faithfully? Did she perhaps take more than prescribed? I cannot say. Such matters are private. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Private, yes. Yet you, a physician, have access to the escritoire where her medicines were kept. Was it not locked? Farnese hesitated a fraction too long. Perhaps she kept it locked. Perhaps not. Poirot sat back, his gaze unwavering. Doctor, forgive me, but you are too calm. Calmness, it can be genuine, or it can be armor. We shall see which yours is. Farnese left without protest, but a faint crease had appeared at his temple. Marchesa Bellante swept in next, regal and unflappable, her eyes glittering like daggers. She regarded Poirot with amused disdain. Madame, Poirot said, warmly, you are a woman of observation. You pride yourself on seeing what others do not. She inclined her head. It is a talent, yes. Then tell me, what did you see last night that others missed? The Marchesa smiled. I saw jealousy. Between Bianca and the Countess, though they spoke courteously, I saw desperation in Bianchi's eyes as he whispered with the Count. I saw Moravec watching the Countess when he thought no one looked. As for myself, I drank champagne and enjoyed the music. That is all, Poirot chuckled softly. Ah, madame, you give me the inventory of motives, neatly catalogued. But tell me, why do you speak so little of yourself? You who know all the secrets of Venice? The Marchesa's smile sharpened. Because, Monsieur Poirot, I have nothing to hide. Poirot bowed slightly. So say we all, madame. Until the moment comes when truth insists otherwise. Caterina Rossi entered nervously, wringing her hands. Poirot spoke kindly. Mademoiselle, do not be afraid. Tell me, when you placed the shawl upon the chair, was the Countess alone? Yes, monsieur. She said she would come after me. But she did not. Poirot's gaze softened. And the coral thread, did you see any garment of that color? The maid bit her lip. I thought I saw a coral scarf, but only for a moment. Near the corridor, before the scream. I may have been mistaken. Poirot leaned forward. No, mademoiselle, such things are not mistakes. They are memory. You did well to speak. Her eyes filled with tears, but also relief. Niccolo Sarto was questioned next. Poirot's inquiries probed deeper into the missing gondola, the velvet cushions, the polished rope. You say you heard the water speak, Poirot murmured. Tell me, did it say how many rowed? 1, 2, Niccolo frowned. 1. Strong strokes, hurried Poirot nodded. Important that. Very important. Julian Moravec entered last, exhaling smoke. Poirot's question struck directly. Monsieur, your glove bears wax. From the east wing. Perhaps. I leaned against a stand, What of it? Poirot smiled faintly. What of it indeed? And yet the candle was blue, unfashionable in this house. Imported. You trade in such rarities, do you not? Moravec flicked his ash coolly. I trade in many things, art, wax, whispers. None of them are crimes. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Not crimes, no. But sometimes accompaniments to crime, like the violin that plays while the dagger strikes. When Moravec departed, Poirot rose, his eyes alight. Inspector Ricci, he said, we are ready for the next stage. Ricci frowned. You mean to say you know who did it? Poirot shook his head gently. Not yet, but already I know who did not. Who, then? Ricci demanded. Poirot smiled. Patience, my friend. We must not cut the flower before it blooms. But listen well, the story as told does not fit together. The Countess did not vanish, as they say. No, she vanished differently. As the words fell, there came a stir at the doorway. A guard entered, breathless, and saluted. Inspector, they have found the missing gondola, abandoned near the island of San Michele, the cushions stained with blood. The room erupted in whispers and cries. Poirot raised a hand. Ah, the false lead arrives, precisely on cue. The gondola, it appears guilty, but mes amis, beware. Sometimes the stage prop is placed only to distract the audience. His eyes shone with the certainty of a man who could already see the pattern, faint but forming like a reflection upon water. The news of the gondola's discovery rippled through the Palazzo Contarini like the toll of a funeral bell. Whispers erupted among the assembled guests, fragments of fear and speculation darting from one to another. Blood on the cushions, abandoned near San Michele, the island of the dead. Inspector Ricci rose at once, demanding silence with a sharp gesture of his hand. The boat will be examined immediately. If the Countess was taken in it, then this may prove the clearest evidence we possess. But Poirot, seated still and immaculate at the long table, did not move. His eyes narrowed slightly, his mustaches quivering as though considering the matter independently of their owner. He tapped his fingertips together with gentle precision, and only when the clamor subsided did he speak. Mes amis, he said quietly, we must not allow ourselves to be carried upon the tide of appearances. A gondola abandoned, blood upon its cushions. Voila, a story writes itself, does it not? But the story, it is too obliging, too convenient. The Marchesa Bellante let out a soft laugh. You mean to say, Monsieur Poirot, that the gondola lies? That boats may conspire against us? Poirot smiled faintly. Not the gondola, madame, but perhaps those who have chosen it as their stage. For it is a stage, make no mistake. This is theater. Someone places the prop, paints it with blood, and hopes the audience, ourselves, will applaud the conclusion. But murder, it is rarely so considerate as to leave such perfect clues. Ricci scowled. Nevertheless, the evidence must be tested. By all means, Inspector, said Poirot smoothly. Test, examine, record. But understand, what we have here is not the solution. It is the false solution, the criminal he wishes us to believe too quickly. And already I see one among us who fears this false lead will prove too persuasive. At this, several heads turned, her eyes narrowing. Bianca Volterra clutched her pearls. Vittorio Bianchi dabbed at his sweating brow. Caterina Rossi shrank back in her chair. Poirot did not identify the one he meant. He merely allowed silence to deepen, like water around a sinking boat. By late morning, Ricci's men returned from San Michele. Their report was simple. The gondola had indeed been abandoned among the reeds. The velvet cushions were stained darkly, the ropes smudged with blood, and a fragment of coral-colored thread lay caught in a splinter of wood near the prow. Coral again, Ricci muttered grimly. The maid swore she fetched a blue shawl. But the evidence sings otherwise. Poirot's eyes gleamed. It sings too loudly, mon ami. Consider, a thread upon the cushions, a thread upon the balcony, the same color, twice presented. Is it not a little too insistent? When one wishes to guide attention, one repeats. It is a trick of the theater. But murder is not theater, unless the murderer makes it so. He rose, smoothing his cuffs, and paced slowly before the assembly. You see, I do not yet know who killed or abducted the Countess, but I know this. The gondola is meant to be our answer. Therefore, it cannot be. It is the decoy. Then what of the blood? Cried Bianca, her voice tremulous. Poirot turned, his eyes piercing. Ah, madame, blood is the easiest thing in the world to provide. One prick of a finger, one shallow wound, and voila, enough to stain a cushion to cry murder without a body. But I tell you this, we have no body. Therefore, we have no proof the Countess is dead. The words fell like stones into the silence. Even Ricci blinked, startled. You mean she still lives? The Count whispered hoarsely, his face pale. Poirot inclined his head gently. It is possible, yes. And if she lives, then this crime is not yet what it seems. It is not passion alone, nor jealousy, nor debt. It is a stratagem. To advance the inquiry, Poirot insisted upon a curious exercise. He requested that each suspect be left free within the great hall while he wandered among them, conversing not in interrogation but in apparent casuality. Observe, he explained quietly to Ricci, how a guilty conscience reacts when the shadow of suspicion shifts. Psychology, my friend. It is the mirror that no criminal can polish clean. He began with Bianca Volterra, whose face was pale but whose manner remained defiant. Madame, he said lightly, do you suppose the Countess could have staged her own disappearance? That she wished to embarrass her husband before his guests. Bianca startled visibly, her pearls rattling against each other. Absurd. The Countess was not so cruel, Poirot nodded, as though her outrage had confirmed a suspicion. He moved on to Vittorio Bianchi. Tell me, monsieur, he asked, if the Countess lives, do you not see? Her principles remain an obstacle. Dead, she cannot oppose your dealings. Alive, she may still ruin you. Vittorio flushed darkly. I tell you, Monsieur Poirot, I'm a businessman, not a murderer. Just so, Poirot replied mildly, but sometimes the businessman is desperate. To Dr. Farnese, he posed another question. Doctor, imagine if the Countess were alive, hidden away. Would her constitution endure such strain? Farnese frowned hardly. She was fragile. Concealment, flight, it would exhaust her utterly. Unless, Poirot murmured, she had assistance. A medical mind to steady her Farnese stiffened but made no reply. To the Marchesa Bellante, Poirot observed, Madame, you said Venice has no secrets. Yet if the Countess lives, then one secret exists still. Do you not find that deliciously ironic? The Marchesa arched an eyebrow. If she lives, she will return. Venice always returns what she swallows. Poirot bowed slightly, leaving her smile lingering like perfume in the air. Finally, he approached Moravec. Monsieur, the gondola, it is but a false trail. Yet you seem amused. Why is that? Moravec exhaled smoke. Because, Monsieur Poirot, the world is full of false trails. In art, in commerce, in life. One must learn to distinguish value from forgery. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, forgery. An interesting word, is it not? For is not this gondola precisely that? A forgery of a crime? Moravec met his gaze without blinking. If so, then you, monsieur, must prove the original. By midday, the guests were restless, nerves frayed by confinement. Caterina Rossi, trembling, was caught whispering prayers in a corner. Vittorio argued with a guard. Bianca demanded water for her throat, lamenting that she might be too hoarse ever to sing again. Poirot, however, seemed entirely at ease. He requested a chair placed by the window where he could sit in the light and polish his moustaches. He appeared to do nothing, yet each gesture, each word spoken aloud to no one in particular, was calculated. At last, he rose. "Inspector Ricci, we must test a theory. I require that all guests return to the Countess's chamber. Yes, all. We shall recreate the scene." The assembly groaned, but his insistence was irresistible. One by one, they filed into the east wing once more, standing in uneasy silence as Poirot directed. The Count, here, by the escritoire. The maid, there, with the shawl. The others, scatter as you were, imagine the ball is still alive. "Inspector, you will stand by the balcony." He paced the room slowly, his eyes half closed, murmuring to himself. The shawl, the brooch, the letter. The dagger taken from the wall, the candle with blue wax, and the gondola, waiting. All is arranged for us to see. Then suddenly, he turned, his eyes sharp. "But you see, it is too neat, too arranged. The Countess, Sylvia, she was not taken struggling. She went willingly to the balcony. She knew the one who awaited her, and the dagger. It was flourished, perhaps even allowed to wound, only enough to spill blood, enough to stage the murder, enough to deceive gasps rippled through the room." Poirot held up a hand. "I do not yet accuse. But I say this. The Countess was no victim dragged into the night. She was persuaded, coaxed, perhaps betrayed, and whoever did so, they remain among us now." Silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. One could hear the faint lapping of water below, the creak of the shutters. Poirot looked from face to face, studying the tremors, the shifts, the flickers of guilt or fear. Then he spoke softly, almost as if to himself. "There is still the letter. Until we know its contents, we cannot complete the picture. But the key lies there. Find the letter, and we find the truth." Inspector Ricci cleared his throat. "And until then?" Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes glinting. "Until then, we play the game. Psychology, Inspector. We place a seed, we watch who waters it, and then we know." He turned back to the suspects, his voice crisp. "Mes amis, each of you believes yourself clever, but understand, murder is a duel not of strength, but of wit. And Hercule Poirot does not lose." And with that, he dismissed them, leaving behind a silence that throbbed with suspicion. Outside, the bells of San Giorgio tolled the hour, and Venice seemed to lean closer, listening, as though eager to know which mask would crack first. The Palazzo Contarini did not rest. Afternoon sunlight streamed across the Grand Canal, gilding the domes and spires of Venice, but within the palazzo, the air remained heavy, stagnant, as though the building itself held its breath. The guests had been allowed a small reprieve from the constant presence of guards, but their freedom extended no further than the mirrored hall, the loggia, and a few adjoining salons. Everywhere else, the corridors were patrolled, the east wing locked. It was a gilded prison, and in every corner, suspicion bloomed like mold. Poirot sat apart from the restless circle, a porcelain cup of coffee before him, untouched. His eyes were half closed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He seemed to drowse, to ignore the tension mounting around him, but those who knew him well would have recognized the intensity of thought behind that apparent languor. He was listening, not to words, but to silences, to whispers cut short, to footsteps halted when he appeared. It was then, in the muted hours between noon and evening, that the second shock fell. A shout rang through the hall. A guard burst in, face pale, eyes wide. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot! Quickly, there has been another crime." The room erupted in startled gasps. Poirot rose at once, his composure unshaken, and followed Ricci through the corridor to the library on the ground floor. There, beneath the painted ceiling and rows of ancient tomes, lay Vittorio Bianchi, the glass merchant. His bulk sprawled grotesquely against the carpet, his hand still clutching a half-crumpled letter. A glass of wine, toppled beside him, stained the rug like fresh blood. Dr. Farnese hurried forward, knelt, and checked the pulse. He looked up after only a moment, his expression grave. Dead. Poison Poirot bent low, eyes sharp. Poison, yes, but not in the glass. See? The wine is untouched. It is in the letter he pointed to the faint smear of powder clinging to Vittorio's lips and the burn upon the paper where moisture had drawn the crystals out. He licked his finger to turn the page. Fatal, Inspector Ricci cursed under his breath. Murder, again. Poirot shook his head. Not again, my friend. Continuation. This is not a second crime, but the same crime unfolding. The murderer tightens the noose, but he does so in haste, and in haste one makes mistakes. He lifted the letter delicately with a handkerchief. Observe. It is unsigned, but the script is bold, elegant. It speaks of opportunity, of a debt soon to be resolved if Bianchi would only hold his tongue about the gondola affair. Ricci's eyes narrowed. So he was silenced. Poirot straightened. Precisely. He knew something, he saw something, and for that, he dies. But mark this well, the letter is bait. Someone placed it knowing he would seize upon it. Someone who understood both his desperation and his greed. Such knowledge is not common to all. The suspects were summoned again, their faces blanched at the sight of the corpse. Bianca Volterra gasped theatrically and clutched at her pearls. Caterina Rossi turned away, trembling. The Marchesa merely raised an eyebrow, as though mildly inconvenienced. Moravec studied the scene with narrowed eyes, exhaling a thin plume of smoke. Poirot raised his hand for silence. Mesdames, Messieurs, let us not give way to hysteria. A man is dead, yes, but hysteria, it is the friend of the murderer. We must keep order. Order, always order. His gaze swept the circle, weighing each face. Consider, mes amis, our gondola, our dagger, our missing countess. It was all a performance, but now, with this death, the curtain rises on Act 2. The murderer grows bold. He seeks to guide us still further astray. He turned suddenly to Bianca. Madame, you wept for the Countess, but for Bianchi you faint not, though you knew him long. Why is that? Bianca stiffened. Because he disgusted me. He pawed at every woman, begged every man for money. Am I to pretend grief for such a man? Poirot's eyes glinted. Ah, but disgust can be a motive also, n'est-ce pas? The Marchesa interjected smoothly. Disgust is motive for gossip, not murder. If Bianca wished him dead, she would only sing louder at his funeral. Poirot inclined his head with mock solemnity. Very just, madame. Yet the funeral may be sooner than we expect, and one does not sing louder when one is caught in a lie. He then addressed Caterina. Mademoiselle, you tremble. Tell me, did you see Vittorio with anyone before his death? She swallowed. Yes, he spoke with Monsieur Moravec in the loggia. I brought them wine. All eyes turned to Moravec. He flicked ash from his cigarette calmly. It is true. He begged me to cover a debt. I refused. That is all. Poirot studied him, then said quietly, Yet it is not all, monsieur. For he left. You with his desperation, and you with opportunity? Moravec's lips curved faintly. And opportunity, Monsieur Poirot, is not the same as guilt. Poirot smiled, as if pleased with the sparring. Touché, monsieur, but we shall see. Inspector Ricci's men removed Vittorio's body, the somber procession echoing through the corridors. Once the room was cleared, Poirot remained behind, his eyes fixed on the shelves of books. he murmured softly, half to himself. The gondola, the dagger, the letter, the poisoned page. Each is a step in the same dance. And the Countess, alive or dead, we cannot yet say. But one thing is certain. The murderer fears discovery. He silences one who knows too much. That is clumsy. That is dangerous. Already the mask begins to slip. Ricci approached, frustrated. But Poirot, what now? We cannot hold them forever. The city whispers already. Rumors spread like plague. Without proof. Poirot lifted a hand. Patience, Inspector. The truth, it grows like a seed. We must water it with psychology. He requested once more that all suspects gather, this time not in the mirrored hall, but in the smaller salon overlooking the canal. The intimacy of the space pressed them closer, their discomfort more visible. Poirot stood before them, hands clasped behind his back. Mes amis, I've told you before, murder is not strength, it is wit. And wit, when driven by fear, reveals itself. One of you believes the gondola points away, believes the poisoned letter silences all questions. But you are wrong, for each act of concealment reveals a truth in reverse. Consider, a dagger on the floor tells us the killer wished us to see violence. A gondola abandoned tells us he wished us to see escape. A poisoned letter tells us he wished us to see desperation. But reality, it is always the opposite. The Countess did not die violently. She did not escape by gondola. Vittorio did not die in desperation. All is inversion. The room buzzed with uneasy whispers. Bianca clutched her pearls more tightly. Farnese's calm mask seemed to flicker. Moravec's cigarette burned low, unsmoked. Poirot continued, his voice soft, inexorable. And so, the question becomes, who among you gains by this inversion? Who thrives when the story is written backwards? He turned sharply to the Count. You, monsieur, do not flinch at your wife's supposed death. You speak of honor, of fortune, of pride, but of grief. You speak little. Why is that? Rinaldo Contarini's face tightened. Because grief is private. Must I parade it before you? Poirot's gaze lingered a moment longer, then slid away. Perhaps. Or perhaps you grieve differently. He turned then to Ricci. Inspector, we must find the missing letter, the one addressed to the Countess. It is the key. Whoever took it fears its words, and that fear, it will betray them. The Marchesa's voice cut through. Suppose, Monsieur Poirot, the Countess herself took it. Suppose she planned all this. Poirot's eyes glittered. Madame, if that is so, then she is cleverer than her enemies. But even the cleverest cannot deceive Hercule Poirot. The afternoon waned. Guards scoured the palazzo for the missing letter, while divers searched the canals. The suspects, confined once more, grew restless, tempers fraying. Bianca quarreled openly with the Marchesa, accusing her of cold-hearted disdain. Caterina wept quietly, whispering that she wished only to go home. Moravec smoked incessantly, his eyes hooded, his thoughts unreadable. Poirot, however, remained serene. He took tea, nibbled at a small cake, and polished his moustaches with care. He seemed to ignore the mounting anxiety, yet in truth he watched every tremor, every slip of the tongue, every contradiction. At last, as twilight painted the lagoon in shades of fire and rose, a guard entered with news. Monsieur Poirot, the escritoire in the Countess's chamber. We forced the lower drawer. Inside, fragments of paper, burnt. But legible in part, Poirot's eyes sharpened. He rose swiftly, more animated than he had yet been. Show me. The guard laid the scraps upon the table. Poirot bent close, piecing them together with delicate fingers. At last, a phrase emerged, scrawled in the Countess's hand. Cannot remain here. Trust no one but the one who holds the wax. Poirot straightened slowly, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Le voilà. The candle, the wax, the plume of smoke, all at last make sense. The suspects stared, baffled, fearful. Poirot turned to them, his voice low and certain. The Countess Silvia Contarini lives, and the one who holds the wax, he is among us now. Soon I shall name him. The words fell like thunder in the closing dusk, and though no one spoke, each felt the walls of the ancient palazzo tighten, as though Venice herself leaned closer, eager to hear the truth revealed. Evening descended upon Venice with a splendor only that city could conjure, golden light flooding the facades of palazzi. The canals turned molten with reflections of fire and rose. Yet within the Palazzo Contarini, the beauty of dusk carried no comfort. The air in the salon overlooking the canal was tense, the gathering of suspects brittle with suppressed fear. Every whisper seemed amplified, every glance weighted with meaning. The guards patrolled more heavily now, boots echoing on marble like a constant reminder of captivity. Poirot sat apart, his hands folded neatly across his waistcoat, his moustaches gleaming in the lamplight. He appeared content, even serene, yet his sharp eyes missed nothing. Each nervous movement, each careless remark was stored away in those precise little gray cells. Inspector Ricci, pacing like a caged animal, had none of his composure. "Poirot," he muttered in low tones, "we are no closer. The gondola is a sham, yes, but Vittorio Bianchi lies dead. In truth, if the Countess lives, where is she? If she is dead, where is her body? You speak of psychology, but my men need evidence." Poirot lifted a finger. "Patience, my good inspector. Evidence, it will come, but the mind, it must prepare the soil before the harvest. Do not be deceived by the quiet. Already the truth, it trembles on the brink of revealing itself." Ricci frowned. "And your clue, this business of the wax?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The wax is the thread that binds the whole tapestry. The Countess herself has told us so. Trust no one but the one who holds the wax. We must consider who among us had such a connection." Before Ricci could press him further, Poirot rose and called for all the suspects to assemble once more. Chairs were drawn hastily into a circle, the flickering light of oil lamps casting distorted shadows across the mirrored walls. It was like a séance, each face pale and restless, waiting for the detective to summon truth from the void. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying easily. "We are in Act 3 of this drama. The gondola, the dagger, the poisoned letter, all diversions. They are props in a play designed to mislead. But the Countess's note, what remains of it, has spoken more honestly than all of you. Trust no one but the one who holds the wax. And so I ask you, which of you had dealings with wax?" There was silence, broken only by the faint creak of a chair. Bianca Volterra's eyes darted nervously. Moravec exhaled smoke, deliberately slow. Farnese clasped his hands. Caterina Rossi bit her lip. The Marchesa smiled faintly, as though amused by the melodrama. Poirot moved slowly among them. "Consider, mes amis, wax. It is not so common as water or wine. We saw blue wax upon the curtain. We saw beads of wax upon a glove. And in Venice, where candles are so abundant, this wax was unusual. Blue, rare, imported. A man of art, a dealer in rarities, he trades in such things, does he not, Monsieur Moravec?" All eyes turned to the Frenchman. He met their gaze calmly, cigarette glowing between his fingers. "I deal in many things, Monsieur Poirot. Paintings, relics, even wax for certain votive figures. That does not make me a murderer." Poirot inclined his head. "No, it does not. But it links you to the Countess's warning. It is to you, monsieur, that she looked or feared to look." You are the one with the wax Moravec flicked ash into a nearby tray. And what of it? If she trusted me, why would I wish her harm? If she feared me, where is her proof? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, but trust and fear, they are not opposites. Often, they are neighbors. A woman in danger may trust the one man who terrifies her most, for he alone holds the key to her escape, or to her destruction. The words sent a ripple through the room. Caterina Rossi gave a little sob. The Marchesa's smile sharpened, but Poirot raised a hand. Do not mistake me. I do not yet accuse. The wax, it is the thread, but the pattern is not complete. And so, we shall test. Psychology, mes amis. We shall play the game. Poirot's game was deceptively simple. He asked each suspect in turn to imagine how the Countess might have fared if she yet lived, hidden somewhere in Venice. Where would she go? Who would aid her? Who would betray her? Bianca Volterra, asked first, replied with too much drama. She would come to me, of course. I am a woman, she trusted me. I would hide her in my apartment by the theatre. Poirot's brow lifted. Hide her, madame. How interesting. Yet you were not asked if you would. You were asked if you could. The words revealed the mind. Bianca flushed and said no more. Vittorio Bianchi, had he lived, might have claimed a hiding place among the furnaces of Murano. Instead, the task fell to Dr. Farnese. She would come to me, the physician said quietly. Her nerves, her exhaustion, she would need a doctor's care. Poirot's eyes softened. And you, doctor, would you betray her? Farnese hesitated. I am not a man of betrayal. No, Poirot said gently. But you are a man of calm, and calm it may conceal as much as it soothes. Caterina Rossi trembled as she answered. She would go nowhere. She loved the palazzo too much. She would hide within it. Even now, Poirot inclined his head. Ah, the maid sees the truth more clearly than the mistress. To remain hidden in plain sight, that is strategy. The Marchesa spoke next, her tone dry. If Sylvia lives, she would play the martyr. She would hide long enough for all of us to tear each other apart, then reappear, triumphant. That would be her style. Poirot bowed slightly. You speak with admiration, madame. Perhaps you admire her more than you admit. Finally, Moravec. He exhaled smoke, smiling faintly. If she lives, she would need a guide. A gondola, a false trail, someone who knows the city's underbelly. And who knows Venice better than I? Perhaps she trusted me, yes. Perhaps she feared me. But either way, I was necessary. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Necessary, indeed. And in necessity, there lies both salvation and doom. Later, when the suspects were dispersed under guard, Ricci turned to Poirot with impatience. You circle them, you speak in riddles. But who killed Vittorio? Who took the Countess? My men grow restless. The city demands an answer. Poirot tapped his temple lightly. The answer, it is close. But we must let the trap close gently. Already, one among them fears exposure. Tonight we shall provoke him. Tonight we shall let him believe he is discovered. Ricci frowned. And if he strikes again? Poirot smiled faintly. Then, my dear Inspector, we catch him in the act. That night, Poirot contrived a subtle stratagem. He whispered to Bianca, to Caterina, to the Marchesa, each in turn, that he had deciphered the Countess's letter fully, that the name it contained was clear. He let the rumor spread among them, knowing that by midnight it would have reached every ear. The murderer, believing exposure imminent, would be forced to act. The household grew tense as darkness fell. Lamps were lit, guards doubled. Yet beneath the glow of chandeliers, unease coiled tighter and tighter. Each suspect watched the others, eyes bright with suspicion. Then, close to midnight, came the moment Poirot had anticipated. A guard patrolling near the east wing shouted for assistance. They found Caterina Rossi collapsed against the wall, her face pale, her breath shallow. In her hand, clutched tight, was a folded scrap of paper. Poirot bent over her, his voice calm. "Courage, ma petite. You're not poisoned, only frightened." He took the paper, unfolded it, and read aloud. "Sylvia is gone. You are next. Say nothing." A murmur ran through the group. Poirot's eyes lifted, scanning the faces. The murderer grows desperate. He seeks to silence the weakest among you, but in his haste, he has betrayed himself. The handwriting, it is the same as in the poisoned letter to Vittorio, bold, elegant, too practiced. And so, at last, the net tightens, his gaze fixed upon Moravec, whose hand trembled just enough to spill ash upon his sleeve. "Soon, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "You shall have no mask left to hide behind. The wax, the gondola, the letter, it is all your work. But understand this, Hercule Poirot has seen through the theatre. The truth, it waits. Tomorrow, before you all, I shall reveal it." The room erupted in whispers, suspicion blazing. Moravec smiled faintly, but his eyes glittered with unease, and Poirot, serene, folded the threatening note and slipped it into his pocket. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "we end the play." The Palazzo Contarini slept uneasily that night. The revelry of the masquerade had long vanished, replaced by the tense quiet of a house under siege. Guards moved through the corridors with lanterns, their shadows looming across frescoed ceilings like grim attendants. Yet within his chamber, Hercule Poirot rested serenely, his shoes neatly placed, his mustaches brushed to perfection, his mind sharper than the blades that glittered in Venetian daggers. He rose with the dawn. Outside, the bells of San Marco tolled, echoing across the misted lagoon. Poirot stood at the window for a moment, gazing at the city that floated upon its waters like a queen upon her throne. Then he turned briskly, adjusted his tie, and prepared for what he knew would be the decisive day. Inspector Ricci met him in the salon, already weary though the morning had barely begun. "Poirot," he said, "I hope today you will at last give us certainty. My superiors grow restless, the city bristles with rumor. Every paper in Venice whispers of murder and scandal at the Contarini Palace." Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience. My good inspector. Today, we shall gather them all, and the truth will walk among us unmasked. But first, I must make a small inspection," he requested once more to be shown the Countess's chamber. Guards unlocked the east wing, and Poirot stepped into the room where the mystery had begun. The curtains still swayed faintly in the morning breeze. The dagger remained sealed as evidence, the escritoire locked again after the burnt fragments had been retrieved. Poirot paced slowly, eyes attentive to every detail. At last, he paused at the balcony, leaning on the balustrade. "Inspector," he murmured, "tell me, how many gondolas were moored here that night?" "4," Ricci replied. "The family gondola with red velvet cushions, the service boat, and 2 older vessels." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "And it was only one that vanished, the velvet boat. Convenient, is it not? The most distinctive of all, the one every witness could describe. The murderer chooses not subtlety, but extravagance." He turned back to the room, eyes alight. "So much theatre, Inspector. Too much. We are asked to believe too heavily in appearances. It is the mark not of confidence, but of fear. The murderer seeks to dazzle us, to make us blind." Poirot left the chamber satisfied, as though some final piece of the puzzle had settled into place. By mid-morning, the suspects had been assembled in the great hall of mirrors once more. The chandeliers blazed above them, but their brilliance could not dispel the tension that clung to every corner. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle. The Count sat at its center, pale and rigid. Bianca Volterra fanned herself restlessly, pearls trembling at her throat. Dr. Farnese maintained his calm, but a tick pulsed faintly at his temple. Caterina Rossi twisted her hands in her lap, eyes red from weeping. The Marchesa Bellante lounged with composed disdain, while Julian Moravec, cigarette in hand, exhaled smoke with studied nonchalance. Poirot entered slowly, as though stepping onto a stage prepared for him. He bowed politely, then took his position before them, immaculate and composed. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he began, "we have reached the moment of truth. For days now, you have played roles, you have worn masks, you have performed your parts upon this Venetian stage. But the time of theater is ended. Now, the truth, she must reveal herself." His eyes swept the group, sharp and commanding. Last night, another letter was placed, an attempt to frighten poor Caterina Rossi into silence. A clumsy act written in the same bold hand as the poisoned message that killed Vittorio Bianchi. The hand of one who feared exposure, who sought to cut short the suspicions before they flowered. But instead, he has betrayed himself. All eyes turned to Moravec. The Frenchman smiled faintly, though his hand trembled just enough to scatter a trace of ash. "Yes, Monsieur Moravec," Poirot said quietly. "You are at the center of this web. You dealt in rarities, in wax, in letters, in shadows. The Countess herself named you, the one who holds the wax. And indeed the blue wax, rare and foreign, is yours. You placed it upon the candles, upon the curtains, upon your glove. You thought to weave a symbol, a signature known only to her. You were both her ally and her betrayer." Moravec laughed softly, exhaling smoke. "And yet, Monsieur Poirot, you have no body. Without it, what do you prove? The Countess may yet walk in Venice, hiding from her husband, from you, from everyone. Perhaps she is alive, perhaps not. Without her, you accuse shadows." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Ah, but that is where you err, my friend. I do not need the body. For the truth, she is here, in this very room." A gasp rippled through the gathering. Bianca clutched at her pearls. The Marchesa leaned forward, eyes glittering. Caterina sobbed softly. Poirot raised his hand for silence. "Let us retrace." At midnight, the Countess is said to have screamed. The guests rushed. They found the dagger, the balcony, the open canal. A gondola vanished. So, she must have been taken by force, oui? Non. Consider the blood upon the dagger. So little. Enough to stain, not enough to kill. Consider also the Countess. She went willingly to the balcony. Why? Because she trusted the one who awaited her. She allowed herself to be wounded for the sake of appearances. She vanished of her own accord, aided by the one who holds the wax. Ricci frowned. "You mean she staged it herself?" Poirot inclined his head. "With assistance, yes. But why? That is the question, and the answer lies in the missing letter. A letter addressed to her, stolen from the escritoire. In it there was a threat. Someone sought to force her compliance, to make her silence certain. She feared for her life. And so she staged her own disappearance, hoping to expose her persecutor." Poirot's eyes turned once more to Moravec. "Monsieur, you helped her. You supplied the wax, the gondola, the false trail. But then she slipped beyond your grasp. You intended to control her, but she turned the stratagem upon you. And you, in panic, killed Bianchi, for he had seen too much. You placed the poisoned letter in his hand, and later you sought to frighten Caterina into silence. Your guilt, it multiplies with each act." Moravec's smile faltered at last. He rose slowly, his cigarette crushed beneath his heel. "You speak well, Monsieur Poirot. But words are not proof. Where is she, then? Where is your Countess?" Poirot's eyes shone. He turned toward the grand doors of the hall and gestured. "Enter, madame." The doors swung open, and there, pale but composed, clothed in a dark cloak, stood Silvia Contarini, the missing countess. A murmur of astonishment swept the room. The count half rose, his face ashen. Bianca gasped. Caterina fell to her knees. Even the Marchesa's composure cracked into shock. The countess stepped forward, her eyes fixed upon Moravec. "Yes, Julian," she said, her voice steady though strained. "I trusted you. I trusted you with my fears, my secrets. You promised safety, but you planned betrayal. You sought to use me, to trade me like one of your relics. And when I resisted, you threatened me. You forced me to flee my own chamber." Poirot inclined his head gently. "And so, madame, you staged your death, knowing only in secrecy could you survive. You left the dagger, you spilled the blood, you fled by gondola, but not the velvet boat. A smaller vessel, hidden among the reeds, carried you to safety. You left the velvet gondola as a decoy to implicate him." Moravec's face had turned grey. He opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot silenced him with a raised hand. "No more, monsieur. You are clever, but you played too heavily upon appearances. The wax betrayed you, the letters betrayed you, and above all, the Countess herself betrayed you by surviving. Voila, the mask is gone." The carabinieri closed in. Moravec's cigarette slipped from his fingers. His calm was shattered at last. His shoulders slumped. Poirot turned to the Count, who still stared at his wife in disbelief. "You see, monsieur, honor and grief, neither were required, for she lives. But reflect. Had you trusted her more, had you valued her counsel, perhaps she would never have sought aid elsewhere." The Countess raised her chin. "I could not remain silent while he," she gestured to Moravec, "conspired to bleed this house of its treasures. Vittorio was part of it. The debts, the frauds, the forgeries, they were all linked. And when I discovered them, he sought to silence me, but I would not be silenced." Poirot bowed. "Courage, madame. You played your part with brilliance. But now the play is ended." Inspector Ricci stepped forward, his voice ringing. "Julian Moravec, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and the death of Vittorio Bianchi." As the guards seized him, Moravec offered only a bitter smile. "Ah, Poirot, you win. But remember, Venice is a city of masks. For everyone you strip away, another remains." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Perhaps. But today at least, one mask has fallen. And that, monsieur, is enough." The hall buzzed with relief, astonishment, confusion. The Marchesa fanned herself with a wry smile. Bianca wept openly, her pearls rattling. Caterina clung to the Countess's hand, sobbing with relief. The Count sank back into his chair, his honor restored, though his pride wounded. Poirot alone remained tranquil, polishing his mustaches with a handkerchief. "It is finished," he murmured softly. "Order is restored. And Hercule Poirot, he is satisfied." The hall of mirrors glowed with the waning light of afternoon, its chandeliers blazing as though to mark the solemnity of the moment. The guests, no longer guests but suspects and witnesses, remained seated in their semicircle. The Countess Silvia, pale yet resolute, sat close to her husband, though her eyes avoided his. The Marchesa Bellante watched with a sardonic half-smile. Bianca Volterra dabbed at her eyes, and Caterina Rossi clutched the Countess's hand as if to anchor herself to reality. Inspector Ricci stood rigid, his gaze fixed on Poirot. And at the center of all, Hercule Poirot rose, immaculate and unruffled, his little grey cells now fully satisfied. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, bowing slightly. "You have seen the curtain lifted. The missing countess returned, the villain unmasked. But still, the play is not complete. For you demand the whole. Every act, every deception, every contradiction explained. And Hercule Poirot, he does not deny you. He walked slowly before them, his shoes glinting beneath the mirrored light, his mustaches gleaming as if they too shared in his triumph. "Let us return to the beginning," he said, "to the night of the masquerade ball, when gaiety and music filled this palace. At midnight, a scream is heard. Guests rush to the countess's chamber. They find the balcony doors flung wide, the curtains billowing, the dagger on the floors, its blade stained with blood. The countess vanished. Immediately, suspicion attaches to the husband. His hands are red with blood. He has quarreled with his wife. His honor is questioned. So convenient, is it not? Too convenient. Always beware when suspicion falls too neatly upon one Poirot turned to Rinaldo Contarini, whose face had tightened. You, Monsieur le Comte, were placed in the role of villain, but you were not the villain. The murderer's first deception was to thrust suspicion upon you. And yet, what struck Hercule Poirot most was not the blood, not the dagger, but the scream. Ah, the scream. It came too soon, too perfectly timed. It was the overture to a play. He lifted a finger. For what did we find upon the floor? Blood, yes, but very little. Enough to stain, not enough to kill. A dagger chosen not from the hand of the assailant, but from the wall itself, like a prop. A gondola missing, the most distinctive gondola, with red velvet cushions. A detail so memorable that every witness could describe it. And then, upon the balcony, a coral thread, a smear of grease. Too many details, too insistent. Mes amis, the first act was theatre. The Countess Sylvia was not dragged screaming to her death. She collaborated in her own disappearance. Gasps rippled through the assembly. The Count turned toward his wife in shock, but Poirot pressed on. "Yes, madame," he said, inclining his head to the Countess. "You staged your death. And why? Because you feared for your life. You had received a letter, had you not? A letter in a bold, elegant hand, threatening, coercing. You kept it in your escritoire, but later it was stolen. You were forced to choose, be silenced or vanish. You chose to vanish, and for that courage, I salute you." Sylvia's voice was low but steady. "It is true. The letter demanded that I keep silent about the fraud I discovered, the conspiracy to bleed my husband's fortune by false dealings in art and glass. I feared for my safety. I knew only by pretending death could I live." Poirot nodded. "Just so. And who aided you in this deception?" "Julien Moravec, the dealer. He supplied the blue wax, the gondola, the trail of false clues. But mark you well, his purpose was not to protect, but to control. For when Sylvia slipped beyond his grasp, when she hid where even he could not find her, he turned desperate. He feared exposure, and then came Act 2. He pivoted sharply, his eyes flashing. The death of Vittorio Bianchi. Poor Vittorio, weighed down with debts, sweating with fear, clinging to every promise of salvation. He knew too much. He had seen dealings between Moravec and the Countess, had perhaps glimpsed the truth of the gondola. So, he must be silenced. And how? With a poisoned letter. Again, the bold, elegant script. Again, the theatrical prop. Vittorio licked his finger to turn the page, and his life ended. A crude trick, but effective, Poirot's eyes swept the group, and yet effective only in the moment. For it betrayed the hand of the murderer, too much the same as before, too eager to repeat the motif of the letter. And later, another letter placed to frighten Caterina Rossi. Again, the same handwriting, the same desperate attempt. Ah, but repetition is the enemy of deception. It shows the mind grown careless. Ricci stepped forward, his voice firm. So Moravec killed Bianchi and tried to threaten the maid. That much is clear. But what of the gondola, Poirot? What of the body that was never found? Poirot smiled. Inspector, the gondola was never the true vessel. It was theatre. The Countess fled in a smaller boat, hidden among reeds, with the help of those she trusted. The velvet gondola was abandoned deliberately, stained with blood to complete the illusion. As for the body, it did not exist, for Sylvia lived all the while, hidden, waiting for the moment to reveal herself. And thus we come to Act 3. Today, he turned to Moravec, who sat sullen, his composure gone. You sought to play puppet master, monsieur. You thought to terrify, to silence, to control, but you underestimated one thing, the human heart. Sylvia Contarini had more courage than you reckoned, and Hercule Poirot had more order in his little grey cells than you imagined. Between the two of us, your theatre is ended, Moravec muttered, and yet you have no proof beyond words. Poirot's mustaches twitched. No proof. But I have every proof. The wax, imported and rare, traced to your dealings. The handwriting of the letters, examined by experts, matches your contracts. The feather found near the private steps, broken from your mask. The ash upon your glove, mingled with blue wax. And above all, the testimony of the Countess herself, who names you as the one who threatened her. Voila. Proof enough to satisfy the law. Ricci gave a sharp nod to his men, who closed in on Moravec. He slumped, defeated. Poirot turned back to the assembly. And so, you see, each deception contained its flaw. The dagger, too theatrical. The gondola, too conspicuous. The blood, too little. The letters, too many. The repetition, the exaggeration, the insistence. It betrayed the hand that sought to mislead. For truth, she's simple. Lies, they are complicated. And in their complication, they unravel. Silence followed his words, heavy, almost reverent. Poirot folded his hands. Mes amis, let us remember, crime is not committed only by brute force, but by psychology. The criminal believes he can control the minds of others, but it is the mind that betrays him. The slip, the overstatement, the gesture too studied. That is why Hercule Poirot trusts not in footprints or fingerprints, but in the little grey cells. They never lie. The Count spoke at last, his voice breaking. Sylvia, can you forgive me, that you were forced to such extremes? She turned to him, her eyes weary. Forgiveness, Rinaldo, is not so simple. You did not threaten me, but your blindness, your pride, allowed others to do so. You saw only honor, not danger. He bowed his head, chastened. Bianca Volterra sighed deeply, as though the drama of the stage had entered her very bones. At least it is ended. The Marchesa Belante smiled wryly. Ended? In Venice, nothing ever ends. We remember, we gossip. This will feed the salons for a decade. Poirot gave a small shrug. Let them gossip. The truth, she is known. Justice, she will be done. That is sufficient. He took out his handkerchief, polished his mustaches, and looked around the hall one last time. And now, my friends, I take my leave. Venice is beautiful, but she is too full of masks for Hercule Poirot. I prefer order, symmetry, the line that is straight, not the canal that curves. I shall dine tonight in peace, with perhaps a creme caramel, and sleep content. For order is restored. He bowed, precise and dignified, and with that, Hercule Poirot departed, leaving the Palazzo Contarini to its aftermath, its scandal, its whispers. Behind him, Venice carried on, ancient, watchful, inscrutable, her waters reflecting both truth and lies. The night after the unmasking of Julian Moravec, Venice shimmered as though nothing had happened. Gondolas drifted languidly across the canal, lovers strolled under the lamplight, and the bells of San Giorgio told their usual rhythm. Yet in the Palazzo Contarini, the atmosphere remained taut, like a violin string plucked too hard. Moravec had been taken away by the Carabinieri, but the echo of his schemes lingered. Poirot sat with Inspector Ricci and Countess Sylvia in a small salon overlooking the water. A silver tray held untouched cups of coffee. The Count hovered by the window, staring out into the mist, his pride cracked but not wholly broken. Caterina Rossi, dismissed to rest at last, had wept herself into exhaustion. Bianca Volterra had returned to her theatre in a storm of pearls and tears. The Marchesa retired, muttering of gossip and its inevitability. Poirot, as ever, was immaculate. He adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his mustaches, and at last spoke. "Inspector, you asked me for proof. You now have it. Letters, handwriting, wax, the testimony of the Countess herself. The courts will have no difficulty. Yet there remains one thing more. Always Hercule Poirot gives the full measure, so that nothing is left untidy. For it is untidiness I cannot endure." Ricci leaned forward. "Then give me the last thread, Poirot. What still remains?" Poirot's eyes softened. "Motive, mon cher, for without motive, even the cleverest crime is but smoke." And Moravec's motive was not only greed, it was possession. He sought to control the Countess, to bind her through fear. When she resisted, he chose murder. And when Vittorio Bianchi glimpsed too much, he too was silenced. It is the pattern of the man, to treat lives as commodities, to be bought, traded, discarded. Sylvia Contarini raised her chin, and yet he failed. "Because I refused to be bought?" Poirot bowed gently. "Courage, madame. You saw clearly when others did not. It was you who placed trust in theatre to counter theatre, who staged your own death to foil his design. You feared, yes, but you acted. In that, you saved not only yourself, but perhaps your husband also." The Count turned, his voice hoarse. "Sylvia, can you forgive me? I did not see, I did not protect you." She regarded him with calm dignity. "Rinaldo, perhaps one day, but forgiveness requires truth, and you must first forgive yourself for being blind." Poirot rose, signaling the moment was done. "Madame, Monsieur, Inspector, the affair of the Venetian Canal is concluded. Justice is in motion, order is restored. That is all Hercule Poirot requires." He reached for his hat and cane. At the door, he paused, glancing back. His eyes glinted with a mixture of humor and melancholy. "Remember this, my friends. Murder is never tidy. It seeks to disorder, to confuse. But in the end, truth has a habit most inconvenient for murderers. She insists on being seen, and Hercule Poirot, he is always there to see her." With that, he departed into the Venetian night. The waters lapped softly at the steps of the palazzo, whispering secrets to the city that had held so many masks, so many lies. And above them, Hercule Poirot walked with serene composure, mustaches impeccable, little grey cells content, for he had once more brought order to chaos and reminded Venice that even in a city of illusions, truth can never drown.